Welcome to another episode of the Bill Chun Show. Last time, or actually the first episode, I had given you a brief summary of my journey for the past few years, past 50 years rather. And what I wanted to do today was break it down a little bit, give you a little more details as to how my family came to be in this country. And yes, I have another amazing guest today. She is my friend, my colleague, my patient. Dr. Ala Tibet will be joining us in a little bit. So, immigrant American, as we all of us are, we know we live with some of immigrants, and I'm sure many of the people we work with are immigrants or descendants. This country is really of immigrants. And I know some ignorant, white people want to deny it, but this country is about immigrants. And this program is, in a very small way, to acknowledge and celebrate who we are. Because it is us, we are making this country better. So let me take you back to my country. I got to start before I was born in 1961. I want to give you a little background. How was it possible that by mid-1970s, Koreans, only next to Mexicans, made the largest group of immigrants to this country? So let me give you a little historical background. So before I was born in 1961, my motherland was at turmoil, war between North and South Korea, as well as United States, Russia, China, and other countries. Between 1950 and 1953, 5 million people died. That's almost 10% of entire Korean population. So by the time I was born in 1961, you can imagine, especially if you are poor, there wasn't going to be much resource. So, and that happened to be the case of my mother. My mother was a teenage pregnant, and I think she hid her pregnancy from her family until the end. And I was born at home with no prenatal care and no attendant. And only in America is it possible for someone like me to be an obstetrician and practicing in Boston. It's a great story that I just am going to talk about over and over and again. So that's how I came to be. But how is it possible that my family came to the United States in 1974? So after Korean War ended, many Korean women married American GI. So this is considered second wave of Korean immigrants to the United States. First wave of Korean immigrants actually was before World War II. But let's stick with the second wave from 1950s until sometime in the late 60s, involved primarily with Korean women and American GIs. And one of my aunts married Uncle Jim. Uncle Jim from Missouri brought his wife, and I didn't know any better until I actually met him. It turns out that he worked in a big grocery store. I wasn't sure exactly what his title was, but I always knew there was Uncle Jim in America who was going to get us to America. So Uncle Jim and his wife sponsored my grandparents, and they came to the United States in 1970. And then, one by one, they sponsored their kids, all 7 of them. And by the time I was aware of it in 1972, I was in cloud 9. And it took us, I think, 2 years for us to get this visa, for us to come in 1974. Going back to the time I was born in 1961, 60s, boy, tough years for South Korea. Interestingly, I was born in June of 1961. A month before I was born, Korean Army General Park took over South Korea through coup d'etat or uprising. He was only 43 years old at the time, and he took over the government. And for almost next 2 decades, he ruled the country almost as a dictator. Can you imagine? Can you imagine right now in the United States, group of army generals taking over this country? Well, back in 60s, it happened in South Korea. While he was unpopular in many ways, I do believe his effort to industrialize South Korea for 20 years is what made Korea what it is now. But during that time, unemployment rate was high. There was constant demonstration, curfew from 12 to 4 in the morning, and the country really wasn't good for a lot of people. And I think my parents in their 30s knew it was time to leave. So let's talk about my father. My dear father was in his 30s, actually 37 when he came to the United States. But while he was in Korea, he really didn't have a particular profession. Do you remember the show Sopranos? Tony Soprano? And he had Paulie, Christopher, and other people work for him, Tony Soprano. I think my father was one of those underlings who worked for Paulie. So he was one of those low-level gangsters, I think. And when I was in Korea, I'd be asked, hey, what does your father do? And I always said, I think he sells auto parts. It turns out, in a particular part of downtown Seoul, where a lot of auto parts were handled, were popular hangouts for gangsters, and my father was one of them. And he was never home. I really didn't see him much, but that's what he did, working as one of those low-level gangsters. And I think he worked as debt collectors here and there, but he'd be gone a lot. And it also turns out that one time he was gone for a while, he was in prison for homicide. That left my mother to find ways to feed her kids and her mother. And my mother, I tell you what, for a woman with very little education, very resourceful. And she did what she could to provide for my family. That left with my grandmother, 할머니. I'm going to show you a picture of, actually only picture of myself. There I am riding a plane. I was 5. Of course, that plane never lifted. And then I want to show you my 할머니. My dear grandmother, for the first 12 years of my life, she raised me because my father was never around and my mother had to do what she had to do to make the ends meet. And my grandmother, that lovely being, raised me. She fed me, she dressed me, she slept with me. And I talk about using outhouse, which even daytime is scary and nighttime is scary as shit. So I can't really, every time I had to go at nighttime, I always made sure my 할머니 was just the outside. And I would often say, 할머니, are you there? 할머니, are you there? And she would always say, yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm here. And you know what? Until I was 4th grade, she's the one who took me to public bath. Can you imagine? Until 4th grade, I went to women's side with my grandmother. And then one day, this attendant said, hey, boy, where are you going? And I said, I'm going with my grandma. And this attendant said, not with that thing between your legs. You're going to the men's side. And I panicked because I've never been to men's side in a public bath. As it is, I go every few weeks, and I always went with my grandma. This time, I'm to go with just by myself. And I think that had to be one of the shortest baths ever. But my grandmother really made sure that my little environment, can you imagine one room where 5 people slept? That's where we ate. I'm not even sure how my parents actually conceived my little brother because it was just one room, and I know my grandmother was always there. But in that environment, it wasn't until I decided we were coming to the United States that I realized that we were poor because I didn't really have to worry about anything. My grandmother made sure that I was at peace. Unfortunately, because of visa, she could not come with us. So in the spring of 1974, we left Korea. I actually want to say we fled Korea because we didn't tell anyone that we were leaving. And I'm thinking it may be because my parents owed money to people, and probably my father's connection was such that he probably should not have left. But there we were in the spring of 1974. Another historic lesson. In 1974, United States was not in a good place. For one, the year before, in 1973, there was oil embargo, which meant that a lot of people had to line up for gas because gas was not available. When Israel went to war against Arab countries, the OPEC, all those countries who manhandled oil supply, really cut the supply off. And that was in place. Plus, Vietnam War was still going on. And Watergate scandal was torturing, at the time, the President Nixon. So the country was really in turmoil. But you know what? For us immigrants, we were coming to America. And I'm going to show you this picture of our first apartment that I was just so, there you go, beautiful. Swifton, just outside of downtown Cincinnati. 1 bedroom, had indoor plumbing, refrigerator, telephone line. And I tell you what, at the time I thought we were living in a fancy villa or something because it was all about toilet. And for those of you who take it for granted that you have indoor toilet, for many of us around the world, it's outhouse, it's hole in the ground. So that was 1974, and I was thrown into a middle school where at the time it was almost all blacks, few non-blacks, whites, and very few Asian students. And after about a month coming to this country, my parents had to leave us behind because they found jobs at a Japanese restaurant about an hour away. And we were looked after by friends and one of my other aunts. Otherwise, we were kind of left to fend for ourselves during weekdays, and my mother would come on Sundays to buy grocery, and then she would go back. Luckily, summer vacation was around the corner. So that only went for about a month. And then we all moved to Loveland, Ohio. Loveland, Ohio. There are actually 2 Lovelands in this country, Loveland, Ohio and Loveland, Colorado. This Loveland is lesser of the 2. I think around Valentine's Day, many postcards get sent from Loveland, Colorado. This one is not. So it turns out that my family was the first Asian family to move into this city. Can you imagine? In 74, there we are. This is about the only picture I have with my father, my mother. My father, good-looking guy, always wearing fancy outfit. I have to laugh at that because that's the outfit he wore when we left Korea, and there he is wearing again. I think that's the only one he must have. And then you see my grandmother in the middle and one of my uncles. So by this time, we moved up because we now are living in 2-bedroom apartment with 13 people. I don't even know how we did that, but 13 people in 2-bedroom apartment. There were 5 of us, my grandparents, my uncle here, and my other uncle, his wife, and 3 daughters. Unfortunately, one of the younger cousins of mine didn't really have that bathroom thing under control. And we had this long, shaggy carpet. And boy, summertime, man, it smelled because she wasn't potty trained. And between that and my poison ivy, rough summer. But that summer probably is one of my happiest summers ever. Why? First of all, I had a job. I worked at a gas station, Exxon gas station, where I was cleaning the toilet, the garage to help out. I was pumping gas because back then self-service wasn't around. So everyone who pulled over, I would clean the windshields, and I would open the hood. I would look for the little stick to look for oil stick and pump gas. And Friday and Saturday, I would work with my parents washing dishes. It's a very happy moment, I think, because I don't recall being with my father for so long. Day in, day out, I saw my father and my mother. It was a simple but elegant Japanese restaurant where they only had a handful of items on the menu. And I recall all these Japanese-speaking waitress wearing kimono. And I thought I was kind of in a good place because, one, we weren't hungry. We actually did not have a car for a while. So all of us during the summertime, when we go from our apartment to the restaurant, it was about 45 minutes walk each way. But we would all walk together until we got bikes. So it got easier because we were riding bikes. But this is why my parents, my father at age of 37, my mother almost 30, sold everything they had and brought their 3 boys to this country without any formal education, without any profession. They were going to make it in this country because they knew the motherland they left, there really wasn't much for their boys. At least in 70s, I'm sure that they weren't going to be able to pay for my college or my brothers. We were never going to be moving out of that one room living condition. We weren't one of those well-to-do ones with refrigerator or TV. We were very limited. So, but I think about how was it possible that my parents had the courage to come to the United States with so little. One of the funny stories I tell you, before we left the Cincinnati area for Loveland, I had come to the United States with one pair of shoes, yellow high top. After about a month, it got ripped and it was hard for me to keep it on. My mother did her best to sew it up and I wore it, but then she knew I needed a new pair. So one day she brings me a pair of new shoes, and I thought, wow, look at these. Blue, red, and some stripe, kind of leather looking, and the bottom didn't look like gym shoes, but it looked kind of fancy. It was a little big for my feet, but it was new. So I wore them to school, and I didn't really know why, but a good number of students and even teachers were laughing at my shoes. And I had no idea until a few days later I realized what I was wearing were bowling shoes. Somehow my mom found a pair of bowling shoes for me to wear. And how in the hell was I supposed to know they were bowling shoes? I've never been bowling. But you know what? I could keep them on. There was my mother, resourceful. She did that. Unfortunately, their living condition didn't last too long because of domestic violence. Domestic violence is prevalent in this country among Asian communities, but certainly very prevalent in overseas, in countries like Korea. And it was always an issue. And it got to be a point where it was going to be too dangerous for my mother. I think safety was an issue. So think about this. My mother, in the spring of 1975, barely a year in this country, she packed a few things in her used Chevy Nova brown hardtop. I always liked that car. And then to me and my younger brother, and we ran away, and she never looked back. And there she is. She looks like a little kid. She still does in her late 70s. 3 of us were starting anew. Soon after, she remarried. And then we were moving to Dayton, Ohio, which is about an hour and 15 minutes from where we were at. And for next few years, I would um, study and go to school in Dayton until I graduated from high school. So 70s, man, I mean, if you look at behind me, 70s, I think still to this day is my favorite decade. When I first came to the United States, I learned that TV was on all night over the weekend. So I would stay up all night Friday and watch TV. And I'd go to bed early in the morning. But that's how I learned the language. Soon Charlie's Angels came on, and wow, what a way to learn English, through Charlie's Angels. And I'm going to have my Bruce Lee soon, because Bruce Lee was the man. For us to see Asian hero like Bruce Lee everywhere, on Tiger Beat magazines to movies, man, we worship Bruce Lee. So I'm going to have my own Bruce Lee bobblehead shortly. And then Pele. Everyone knew who Pele was. And Pele joined New York Cosmos in 1976. And soccer, for me, as well as for most people around the world, is really the favorite sport that we like to watch. So for me to go from one school to next, by the time I went to Fairmont East High School, I don't know, there was my fourth or fifth school, still trying to learn the language. And I was such a shy boy, extremely shy. But you know, I always remembered that I needed to go to college, and I knew I was going to go to military school, just like the Army-Navy game that I saw in 1973. So I spoke with one of my student counselors who told me how to get hold of Annapolis handbook, and he told me what I needed to do, and I did exactly that. I wanted to make sure that I kind of stood out. What stood out was that I was a new immigrant, still learning the language. I was doing well in school, and I played soccer. So soccer, even now, but back then, you know, soccer. When you play soccer, there I am. I was on a varsity team as a sophomore, and I was trying to grow a little mustache. So, you know, soccer team, it's not exactly a football team or basketball team, but we did have our own cheerleaders, which meant that it was in a way of a new immigrant to learn what high school life is like. And of course, because I was working, I was able to get my first car. As soon as I turned 16, like that week, I took my saved $500 and bought my first car, Chevy Chevelle. Unfortunately, it was a lemon. But still, I had a car, and I had a few friends, and I was being invited to few parties, which meant that, you know, I got to do what typical kids did in 70s, right? I got to learn to drink, smoke, this and that. Just learning, wow, this is America. Now I'm an American. But I always focused on study because I needed to go somewhere beyond high school. So, I was in a good place, even though we were living in a public housing. It's funny because before I had my first car, when my friends' parents dropped me off after practice, they would usually drop me off like a quarter mile from where I lived because I was so embarrassed that I was living in public housing. I didn't want anyone to know where I lived. And I always said, you know what, when I grow up, one of the first things I'm going to do is make sure I don't live in a public housing. That it just, you know, it may be a simple thing to many people, but as a young boy, that really meant something. A few goals I had in my life was never, 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 ever live in a public housing. So I played soccer, I did well in school, and I was going to get into one of 4 service academies. There's Air Force Academy, West Point, Annapolis, and Coast Guard Academy. So my focus was to study, play soccer, and try to get nomination. So for non-military person, you need a nomination to apply to one of these service academies. You need either senatorial or congressional nomination. And I was lucky enough to get one from Tony Hall. And I tell you what, there's a picture of me here graduating from high school. There I am, again, little mustache. 1980, 18 years old. So 6 years after coming to the United States, I was graduating. And shortly after, I was on a Greyhound bus with $50 in my pocket. I was on my way to Annapolis, baby. And like, there I am, back there somewhere. We were waiting in line to be inducted first day of plebe summer. And little did I know that by the time we got the uniform, all of us, there I am. This is not the original picture, but I'm there somewhere in the summer of 1980. One thing I forgot or never considered when I got into Naval Academy, I did not know how to swim. So, second day of the academy, I'm told to change into this little Speedo. I said, okay, I've never worn one of these. I get in, and I'm told that I need to take swimming test, and I raise my hand. Luckily, I wasn't the only one. Maybe 1 out of 10 of us raised our hands and said, "Sir, I do not know how to swim, sir." And I remember this little short Japanese American instructor telling me, "How in the hell did you get here if you don't know how to swim?" I think I might have said, "No one asked me. It should have come to me. If I'm joining Navy, I should have known how to swim." But I didn't. But I would say for next 18 months, aside from my grandmother, Harmony, who raised me for the first 12 years of my life, and my mother, who over and over used her wits and her persistence to raise us, it is those 18 months in Naval Academy that gave me the backbone, the foundation I needed to be where I am. So I'm going to end my story here because I know my friend is patiently waiting. I wanted to bring on Alla on this program. For one, she's an immigrant American from Russia, and she's one of the brightest people I know, critical care specialist. And as a fellow healthcare provider, I think her story fascinates me. It looks like she went into medical school at a very early age, very prestigious medical school in Moscow. And then she comes to the United States. And if I'm not incorrect, she went through another 4 years of medical school in this country. So I'm going to bring her on, and let's hear Alla.
Hello.
Hey, there she is. How are
Hi.
you?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I
Hello?
cannot hear you.
Oh, good. I hear you
Let's
too.
see. Just a second. We can fix this. We're going to connect that. Can you hear me now? Can you
Yeah,
hear
I
me
hear
now?
you.
Perfect. Alla, how are you?
Good. Good,
Did you-
good. How are you
Did you
doing?
work today?
No. Thanks
No?
God.
Yeah.
I
How are the
had a
little
day
ones?
off.
How are the little ones?
Very good, very good.
Very good. Well, you look
They're growing
fabulous.
fast. Thanks.
Alla is not only a critical care specialist, but she's the mother of lovely twins. How old are they now?
In October, they will be 8 months.
Oh my God, 8 months already. Jim and the cricket, it flies by quickly.
That's
So
right.
I wanted to have you on because your story is fascinating, you know.
Thank you.
And this program is really about immigrant Americans because all of us are immigrants. And I wanted to bring you on and hear about your story. So when I looked at your CV, were you 16 years old when you studied med school?
17.
Oh, excuse me, 17.
A
Okay.
little bit earlier than 17. My birthday actually at the end of September. It's coming up, but school starts in the beginning of September. So yes, before 17.
Before 17, you start med school. 6 years later, you get your degree.
Yes.
from Moscow. Is it
Medical
Sechenov?
Academy. It's a first. It used to be called First Institute.
Mm-hmm. So, and then you did your residency training,
That's right.
and then you decided to come to the United States.
Well, let's put it this way: I was forced to immigrate.
Why?
Yes, I'm coming from a very diverse family background, so was a challenging childhood for me. And, my family comes from some of the nobility lines, so my older family members, a lot of them were pronounced as enemies of the state and then executed at the time of
Wow.
revolution and later during the Stalin's times as well. My granddad's brothers were, some of them were in jail as enemies of the state, political prisoners, and some of them were executed. And a lot of, my grandmother's family members were executed. So, despite getting an education in Russia at that time in Soviet Union, my grandparents had to migrate all over Soviet Union because the government was structured such that they didn't want to have any politically unclear people near capital cities such as St. Petersburg and Moscow. Any position not available to them. So we had to migrate. We were living in different cities. We were living in Yekaterinburg, which used to be called Sverdlovsk. We were living in Middle East, in Asian, republics. We were migrating all over Soviet Union, basically where the government would recommend us to go. So I grew up in multiple different cities. I have a lot of diverse friends, thanks God, and they still stay my friends who got in touch so many years after. But when I applied to get to medical school, I was not the first doctor in the family, had the doctor before. I basically passed the exams. I passed the exams with very good scores, but there was a competition of the application. What that means is that if they don't like something in your application, and they certainly didn't, they have to give you an interview basically. So you coming in, and there is a panel of professors who are interviewing each candidate who did not pass that competition of applications. And I remember there was about 9 of us, all different ethnical background students who were applying. And I remember coming into the room, I was like 16, coming on to 17 years old, and all this, elderly males sitting in the room, behind big tables were asking me, why did you decide to apply to our medical school? And one of them just bluntly said in my face, there are other medical schools to apply to. Why do you want to? Why are you all crawling here, basically? This is a direct translation. I didn't even know what to answer. I was
Because it was the
so
best.
distraught. Yeah.
Isn't it one of the best med schools?
Yes. Yes. It's like equivalent of Harvard Medical School in the United States, I would say.
Right.
Yeah. And the education was very strong, but the system was corrupt from the inside. In so corrupt, you wouldn't even, if I start, describing how corrupt it was, or your parents are wealthy and somehow made some money and they know someone and they're paying you off all your exams, or you're struggling through blood basically to pass through exams because they do really want to get rid of you and replace you with someone who can pay off the professors. So there were very talented people in my class who did not have any financial means to pay off, so that we had to all pass exams by blood, basically. So that was very challenging to begin with. And in the middle of that, the lady who I lived by, who was a distant relative of my grandfather, passed away. And I was registered in Moscow in her apartment. And what it means in Soviet Union, every citizen had to be registered at their place of living. Otherwise, you wouldn't have any benefits, no medical insurance. You would not be granted permission to work or attend a school or anything like that. So when she passed away, her relatives decided to confiscate an apartment and come into the property, and they got rid of me in my registration. So my registration was canceled. And that was a catastrophe because being as at that time I graduated from medical school, I was looking for the residency position, and all of a sudden I'm losing my place of residence, and it was a catastrophe. My other family branch, who was kind of distant family relatives, I wrote them a letter saying that I'm in a very difficult situation. I have no place to live. I'm losing my residency. I could lose my medical residency placement because of that. If you guys would be able to allow me to be registered at your place, I can live by my friends, but I can be registered in your place. They pretended did not receive my letter. So, it's funny say, because they didn't want anything to do with me, as I later found out, because one of their family members wasn't very high in the KGB. In fact, he was a colonel. So he couldn't have me being registered with one of his family members' apartments or something like that. And they basically left me as a medical resident, just graduating from medical school, on the streets of 10 million city, fending for myself.
And they adopted new respect for you, Jiminy Cricket.
Can you imagine? Yeah. They adopted 3 dogs and left me out on the street. Yeah. So, my friend, my mom and everybody was getting through the process of immigration. So I decided I have to go. I'm going to finish my residency and I will join my family. I didn't want to interrupt my residency. So they allowed me to stay in residency despite losing my registration in Moscow. And there was kind of turmoil, 90s and 2000s, like beginning of 90s. End of 90s and beginning of 2000s. And somehow the professor she was in charge of our department, she allowed me to stay. Otherwise, I wouldn't be even to graduate. If it would come up in the university administration, they would dismiss me. So this is kind of was my situation. So I had to immigrate. I had no other choice.
So then you come to United States, and then you went to another medical school.
Yeah, so when I came in, I basically had no mentorship. I was in the diaspora of Russian immigrants, and as you know, Bill, coming to diaspora is very, very hard because you're sort of newbie despite being young adult. You have no idea how this country functions from the inside, and even a system, the medical system that you're familiar from the, international perspective, you're not familiar what it takes to become a doctor or a nurse here in the United States. And I've seen a lot of my family friends, newly acquired friends in the United States who were from the same background as myself, were basically suffering the brain waste, what is called like skill underutilization in the United States, which a lot of immigrants with college degrees are subjected to. It's like doctors who were doctors in Russia, like neurosurgeons working as a taxi drivers, or working as a nurse, neurosurgeon working as a nurse, or nurse, ICU nurse, or cardiac ICU nurse working as a home health aide for someone. So this is what I've seen. And I said, well, I cannot allow to lose my medical degree. I need to be in the same place. I want to be a doctor. I don't know anything else how to do anything else. So, things. There was a friend of my father who was a French attaché in the diplomatic mission with my father. Was working for one of the companies of the diplomatic mission in India. He met this gentleman who was working with François Mitterrand, who was the president of France at that time. So that French attaché said, I know people in the United States. I know people who are deans of medical schools. He's like, let me make phone calls, but you have to pass all the exams. So I had to study, take TOEFL, MCAT, everything again.
Did you
And I
did you
did.
speak English when you got here?
Say it again?
You didn't speak English though, did you?
I did, but my understanding of English was,
Remarkable.
completely different
It's
from the level
amazing.
of English I needed to get
Right.
to enter the professional society or even enter the university level,
Right.
So passing TOEFL was a piece of cake, but when I realized when I started classes at American University, I'm not understanding like one third of what they're saying. So I had to read and read and read and read a lot on my own to match, and knowing medical lingo, knowing Latin, really helped because a lot of that was medical terminology.
Right.
And I knew it very well. So that helped a lot. And, by getting exams and being accepted in two medical schools, I decided to choose uni because it was close where my family was. And I went over there and I never looked back. But, I had to work two jobs. I had to do like
But
things.
look at you now. You have an amazing husband, two kids,
Yeah.
and I mean, people don't realize, first of all, how difficult a language Russian is. Russian is like one of the toughest
Yes.
languages, maybe next to the Arabic. It's very tough language.
Yes.
So you mastered that language. You have English. I don't know of anyone who has two medical degrees like you do, because I didn't realize it until I saw your CV. You have two medical degrees and
Yes.
bunch of publications. And with such difficult background, looking at you, you are a survivor, you persisted, and you, like many of us, are this is American dream because in this country, if you apply yourself, right, you can do whatever you want to do.
You can. And I can tell you that, being in healthcare, that's one thing, but I worked many jobs when I was starting medical school because, my family did not have financial means to support me. I had to apply for the loan, and that was a different story. And but I had to work. And I worked. I was cleaning in a hotel, and I will tell you, majority of the housekeeping department were immigrant girls, young immigrant women who had, little children, and they had to work all day long, and there were all different sorts of people, different colors, different languages, all very low income. We were getting paid like, I don't know, $6 an hour.
But
Yeah,
we don't have that medical school committee like back in Russia who tells you otherwise because of your family background. Here,
that's
it's
right.
fair and
I,
square, you know?
that's right. Exactly. You don't have to pass that embarrassing, humiliating, condescending interview that you go through. You do have some interview for the medical school application, as my
Sure.
friends later told me, when you pass in, it's completely different. It's nothing what I experienced when I see my friends' children go apply for medical school and what interviews they go through. It's nothing. It is more professional. It's nothing that you experience over there. Over there, the system is corrupt. It's corrupt in your face. Nobody's hiding that fact from you. And,
You know, I
that's how it
I
is.
th- I think about when this COVID-19 started. You're one of the because of your background, ICU, critical care, and whatnot. But COVID-19 really never phased you. You said like, we'll deal with it. Yeah, I mean, you attacked it head on. You went to work. You never shied away from it. And even after babies were born, you went back quick. And it's just, I can only applaud. And I did
Yeah.
not know your background. And it makes me just feel very humble in front of you for what you had to go through.
Thank you. And I appreciate the nice words. Very, very much appreciated. And I'm not in it by myself. It takes a village, to help people. And I think with COVID-19, everybody got very, very humbled and realized that we just made out of meat. Doesn't matter what color we are, where we come from, we all the same. We get sick the same, and we have to have you know, love and compassion for each other. You know,
Sure.
that's what we need to do. And America gave me so much more than Russia ever could. So, I had to come out. I was on maternity leave, and it was a month and 1 week after my delivery that the hospital called me and asked if I can cover the shifts because they were
Wow.
running out of ICU doctors. And I came out.
Yeah. Amazing.
Without day off ever since. I don't
It's
look back. We
hmm
needed to help people. Each one of them
sure.
had story behind, and it doesn't matter. It's like one of my friends said, you black, I see you. You white, I see you. You any other color, green, purple, brown, I see you. So I do see you.
Hmm. Ala,
Yeah.
thank you so much. I
You're
want to,
welcome.
before you go, tell us something in Russian, something positive that would be encouraging other Russians, maybe who hear this, and just some words of wisdom in Russian.
Yes. So in Russian, let me tell you that in English first, so you know what I will be saying. So there is an expression that if you turn your face to the sun, you will never see the shadows.
Hmm.
So this is how you have to live your life. And I do believe that there is always an opportunity to excel, as one of my professors used to say. So I do want to say to all of my friends who suffering that skills underutilization, who are immigrants coming from different countries, who look for that opportunity, you can do whatever you dream of and much more in this country,
Hmm.
and you have to go for it. And in Russian, that would sound like если вы повернете голову к солнцу, лицом к солнцу вы никогда не увидите теней. И все, кто хотят чего-то достичь в Америке, всегда получат возможность достичь того, о чем они мечтают, и гораздо-гораздо больше. That's it.
Lovely. Next time I see
Thank
you, I
you.
want to give you a big hug. Say hello to your husband for
Thank
me.
you.
Get
Thank
some
you so
rest.
much. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me.
Of course.
Thank you.
Another. I don't know what to say. I think more than a few times I could have cried just listening to her story, how she persisted, how she fought that Russian government and the infrastructure, how she stayed the truth and then came to this country. And she is one of the smartest physicians I know. And I tell you what, this year with COVID 19, many people took different route, but not Allah. She from the whenever she could, she took it head on and covered many ICU units around Boston. And thank God for Allah. And her two little ones are very lucky to have such an amazing mother. And her husband is not a bad guy either. Anyways, until next time, thank you very much. I look forward to joining you again soon.